there was one engine that British truckers asked for by name. Not because it was the cheapest, not because it was the easiest to maintain, but because when you were hauling heavy loads across Britain, night after night, you needed something that would not let you down. The Rolls-Royce Eagle diesel built a reputation that most engines never came close to. But how did it get there? And why did it eventually disappear? Let's find out. Most people hear Rolls-Royce and picture a long black car on a red carpet. That image was built on decades of precision engineering. But there was another side to that name, one that had nothing to do with luxury cars and everything to do with heavy work. Rolls-Royce had been building engines far longer than most people realised. During World War I, their Eagle aero engine powered some of Britain's most important military aircraft, and in June 1919, 2 Rolls-Royce Eagle engines carried pilots John Alcock and Arthur Brown across the Atlantic Ocean in a modified Vickers-Vimy bomber, the first non-stop transatlantic flight in history. That name, Eagle, carried serious weight long before it ever appeared on a lorry. After World War II, Rolls-Royce decided to push deeper into the diesel engine business. In 1950, they formed the oil engine division. By 1951, they were producing diesel engines for heavy tractors and earth-moving machines. Later, those engines found their way into lorries, rail cars, and industrial applications. The man who led that effort was William Arthur Robotham. He had visited the United States in 1947 and watched how American manufacturers were reducing truck tare weight using light alloy engines. Rolls-Royce had deep knowledge of aluminium alloys from their aeroplane work. Robotham saw that expertise could cross over into something completely new. The first diesel range they produced was called the C range, a family of 4, 6 and 8-cylinder engines built initially in Derby, then transferred to Shrewsbury after Rolls-Royce acquired the Sentinel factory there in 1956. Sentinel had been a famous steam wagon builder. That chapter ended when Rolls-Royce moved in. The Shrewsbury buildings now served diesel engine production and would do so for 3 decades. The C6 cylinder became the best-known variant of that family. It produced around 200 brake horsepower and found its way into Scammell lorries, military vehicles, and construction equipment. Pickford's heavy haulage operated Scammell Constructor 6x6 tractors with C-range diesels, capable of hauling 200-ton loads in push-pull combinations, with 2 or 3 locomotives working together. British Rail put the C-range into their first-generation diesel multiple units. The Royal Navy used them in naval vessels. The engine worked across an enormous range of applications, but it had a fundamental limitation. It was designed as an industrial engine first. Trucks came second. As Britain's roads carried heavier payloads and operators pushed vehicles harder over longer distances, the industry needed something built specifically for road work from the ground up. That gap pushed Rolls-Royce engineers at Shrewsbury back to their drawing boards. They had the skills, they had the factory. What they needed was a clear brief: build a diesel engine specifically for British trunk haulage, not adapted from something else. And what they came up with in 1966 changed British road transport for the next 20 years. The launch of the Eagle on 15 July 1966, Commercial Motor published the announcement the British trucking world had been waiting for. Rolls-Royce was entering the heavy truck engine market with a purpose-built diesel called the Eagle. This was not the C range with a fresh coat of paint. The engineers at Shrewsbury had taken the C6 as their starting point and redesigned it from the inside out for sustained road use. The Eagle was a 6-cylinder inline diesel, bore 130.2 mm, stroke 152.4 mm, total displacement 12.17 litres. At launch it came in 3 versions: the Eagle 205 at 205 brake horsepower, the Eagle 220 at 220 brake horsepower, using slightly larger inlet and exhaust valves to reach that output, and the turbocharged Eagle 260 at 260 brake horsepower. All 3 shared the same crankcase and block casting, meaning a truck builder could slot any variant into the same chassis with no structural changes required. The crankshaft was fully counterweighted and dynamically balanced. Bearing surfaces were lapped to a finish of 6 micro-inches. For a heavy truck diesel, that level of machining precision was unusual. Net dry weight of the naturally aspirated versions was approximately £2,450. The turbocharged version added around £112, a modest penalty for the extra power. What most separated the Eagle from the C range was the sodium-cooled exhaust valves, fitted to all three versions, including the naturally aspirated units. Sodium inside each valve stem drew heat away from the head continuously, protecting the valve at the sustained high temperatures that long-distance running produced. This was a technique borrowed directly from aero engine manufacturing. Its presence in a truck diesel was a signal about how seriously Rolls-Royce had approached the durability brief before a single Eagle went on public sale. Prototype engines had been running hard in South Africa, Australia and Canada. The Australian vehicles had covered 300,000 miles. The Canadian ones had covered 250,000 miles. Real distance, real conditions, and the engines had held together. And then came the price. Most operators assumed a Rolls-Royce engine would carry a premium over Gardner or Cummins. It did not. The Eagle launched at the same price bracket as the competition. That removed the last obvious reason not to try it. Within 10 months of launch, 4 of Britain's biggest truck builders had already signed on: Atkinson, Foden, ERF and Scammell. The November 1967 issue of Commercial Motor noted that further names were expected to follow. The Eagle had entered the market, and the industry was paying close attention, powering the legends of the road. To understand what the Eagle meant to British roads, you have to look at the trucks it powered. Atkinson Lorries in Preston had been building respected haulage vehicles since the 1930s, built their name on dependable Gardner-engined rigids, and had earned a loyal following among British hauliers. In 1970, Atkinson renamed their entire model line. The 2-axle tractor unit became the Borderer, the 3-axle unit became the Leader, and alongside Gardner and Cummins, the Rolls-Royce Eagle was now officially listed, with model codes like T3246RR220 and T3246RR280 telling buyers exactly which variant they were specifying. The Atkinson Borderer with a Rolls-Royce Eagle became one of the most recognised sights on British trunk routes through the late 1960s and 1970s. Drivers who ordered one knew what they were getting: strong pulling power on loaded climbs, a smooth, quiet cruise on flat motorway sections, and the quiet pride of running an engine that came from a company that built fighter plane powerplants. Scammell in Watford launched the Crusader at the 1968 Earl's Court Commercial Vehicle Show as a 6x4 tractor unit. The following year, they developed a 2-axle version for premium long-distance operation, powered by the Eagle at 220 or 280 brake horsepower. The Crusader 280, displayed at the 1971 Scottish Motor Show at Kelvin Hall, used the turbocharged 12.2-litre Eagle, producing 265 net installed brake horsepower. Demand for the Crusader was strong enough that production eventually transferred to Guy Motors in Wolverhampton just to keep pace with orders. British Road Services, then the country's largest transport operation, actively encouraged Scammell's development of the 4x2 Crusader, a direct endorsement of the Rolls-Royce Eagle as the engine they wanted in the vehicles they operated. RF in Sandbach assembled trucks from bought-in components, engines from Gardner, Cummins, Rolls-Royce, gearboxes from Eaton and Rockwell. That model gave fleet buyers more genuine choice than any integrated manufacturer could offer. Many of those buyers chose the Eagle. RF ran it through their A, B, C and E series trucks as a consistent option across 2 decades. Seddon Atkinson, formed after Seddon acquired Atkinson in 1970, specified Eagle outputs of 220 to 365 brake horsepower across their Borderer range for heavy haulage through the early 1970s. One fleet mechanic who maintained these vehicles later described running a Seddon Atkinson to 600,000 miles on the same Eagle engine before the truck was eventually retired. And the British Army placed their trust in the Eagle on a scale that told its own story. Over 7,000 Eagle engines powered British military logistics vehicles, Fodens, Seddon Balkans, ERFs, and Scammell Unipowers, making it the primary heavy vehicle engine for British Army ground transport. When a military procurement team selects an engine to carry equipment and supplies in demanding conditions around the world, they are not making that choice on the strength of a famous name. By the mid-1970s, the Eagle held equal market share with both Gardner and Cummins in the UK heavy truck engine sector. Over 2 decades from launch, it was fitted to most major British lorry chassis on the market. For an engine that started as a complete newcomer in 1966, that was a remarkable and hard-won position. The testimony of the highway numbers and specifications only tell part of the story. The real picture came from the people who drove Eagle-powered lorries for a living. In September 1974, Commercial Motor published detailed testimony from working fleet operators and drivers relating to the new Eagle Mark III. These were real people with real companies behind them. Richard Morton was the branch engineer at Eastern British Road Services in Burton. His fleet ran Eagle engines for approximately 22 hours a day across 3 shifts, feeding 6 depots across the country. With the Mark III, he achieved 8.7 miles per gallon in sustained fleet use, and stated that he considered them the engines for the future. Jerry Smith was the transport manager at Bulmers in Hereford. His company ran 26 Rolls-Royce Eagle engines. He reported practically no trouble with them. What stood out most was the Mark III's dramatically reduced smoke output, tested at 10 HSU against a legal ceiling of 30 HSU, and the consistent feedback from his drivers about how quiet the engine felt at the wheel. Jack Pritchard was a driver who had spent 7 years in Eagle-powered trucks when the Mark III arrived. He said it felt strong on hills. The quietness caught him off guard. He told the magazine that until you got used to it, you genuinely wondered whether the engine was running. He called it the best motor he had ever driven. Alan Kite ran a small haulage operation in Rowley Regis doing long-distance work. He praised the Eagle's straightforward maintenance, something that mattered greatly to a small operator doing his own servicing. On TruckNet UK forums, veterans who ran Atkinsons and ERFs in the 1970s and 1980s returned repeatedly to the same description. The Eagle pulled like a train. One driver ran an Eagle 280-powered truck from Britain to Turkey, Romania, Italy, and over the Alpine passes at Mont Blanc and Mont Cenis, over 3 years of hard international work, without significant mechanical failure. Fleet mechanics told a more honest story. The internal oil galleries used assemblies of short pipe sections and die-cast housings held together by O-rings, more than 200 of them in the sump, set alone in some configurations. Keeping them sealed required consistent attention. Injection pumps needed rebuilding more than once across a typical in working life. Cold starting in winter could be inconsistent on older or poorly serviced examples, but those same mechanics described stripping Eagle engines at 400,000 miles and finding the original injectors still calibrating correctly. The core of the engine, block, liners, crankshaft, valves, was built to outlast everything mounted around it. An engine that rewards proper maintenance and shows its age without it was not unusual for that era of heavy diesel. What was unusual was that combination of pulling torque, mechanical quietness, and thermal stamina all together in the same package. Competitors of the time rarely matched all 3 crises, ownership changes, and evolution in February 1971, one of the most dramatic industrial collapses in British history, put Rolls-Royce on the front page of every newspaper in the country. The company had entered a fixed-price contract to supply Lockheed's L1011 Trisata airliner with a new jet engine called the RB211. Development costs were catastrophically underestimated. On 4 February 1971, Rolls-Royce Limited entered receivership. 80,000 jobs were immediately at risk. Parliament described it as a major national tragedy. The British government nationalised the core aero engine and gas turbine business. But the diesel engine division was not included in that rescue. It was separated out into Rolls-Royce Motors, a distinct company that went public in 1973, and continued operating from Shrewsbury as before.